There's always a time when you're scrolling on Netflix and see a weird movie under the horror section. You tell yourself it can't be that bad until you click on Tusk. Let's get into the review. Tusk is a movie about a podcaster named Wallace Brighton, played by Justin Long, who has his own podcast called The Nazi Party. No, we're not talking about the brutal German regime. It's pronounced not-see, not Nazi. Yeah. You know, this movie can be like this at times, but at least it understands itself. So basically, Wallace finds different humiliating and viral videos and stories to which he mockingly retells his friend, Teddy Kraft, played by Haley Joel Osment. Yes, the man, the myth, the legend from the movie The Sixth Sense is back, and back at it again in an even more better movie, Tusk. One of the viral videos showed a Canadian internet celebrity, Kill Bill Kid, famous for accidentally cutting off his leg while messing with a katana. You aren't Deadpool, son. I know you want to be, but you ain't. You ain't no Deadpool. Delighted by the feedback, Wallace decides he's going to fly out to Manitoba, Canada to interview the kid himself. Upon arrival, Wallace is informed that Kill Bill Kid committed suicide due to all the bullying he was getting. Later that night, Wallace goes to a nearby bar which he calls Teddy, telling him about the unfortunate news. Having no sympathy for the kid, Wallace even calls the kid selfish and that he is jealous for him. This is where you figure out how inhumane Wallace's character is. He's just not the nicest guy to be around, you know. This kid killed himself and he has no sympathy at all for the kid. After having a few drinks, Wallace uses the bathroom to where he finds a handbill written by an old man named Howard Howe, played by Michael Parks, offering a free room and a lifetime of interesting stories. Not wanting to waste a trip to Canada, Wallace decides to drive to the man's house and give it a shot. When he arrives at the house, he meets Howard in person, seeing how he needs a motorized scooter to get around. You know, a little bit of an old fella. Eventually, the two get settled down and Howard brings out some tea, which Wallace is very complimentary towards. Howard starts telling Wallace various stories, most being old people stories. However, one of them catches his attention. Howard talks about how he was in a boating accident when he was younger, and a walrus saved his life by bringing him to an island. Howard, about to die from freezing, was forced to kill the walrus to stay warm. He calls the walrus Mr. Tusk. Right as he finishes that story, Wallace passes out, indicating that Howard may have put something slightly different than honey into his tea. Don't drink the Kool-Aid, tea. Don't drink the tea. Come on, Wallace. Don't drink the tea. Then a flashback occurs where we meet Wallace's girlfriend, Allie Leon, played by Genesis Rodriguez. This flashback takes place before Wallace leaves to Canada. Allie is trying to convince him to stay and that what he's doing is wrong. That exploiting a suffering young boy in front of a large audience is something she cannot support. The movie goes back to real time and Wallace wakes up in a wheelchair, missing a leg. Howard tries to convince him that a brown recluse spider bit him and that amputation was the only way to save his life. Wallace isn't buying it, and neither was I. Just look at that old dude. Although it is kind of disturbing, the different excuses Howard tries coming up with when Wallace confronts him are so unrealistic that Wallace's face is like, bruh, you clearly lying. Howard eventually leaves the room and tells Wallace to meet him for supper later, leading to a really intense scene. Since we're headed to spoiler waters, I've got to stop here and give a quick spoiler warning to everyone out there that hasn't seen the movie yet. If you're a horror fan who has a decently high tolerance for really disturbing things, I would recommend this movie. I've seen it 3 times, once with one of my horror friends, once with another friend who wasn't horror, who really got disturbed by it, and once in preparation for this video. But I'll tell you, the first few times I've seen this movie, I had a really good time. I think it's a really fun film. Get ready to be really disturbed, get that really uneasy feeling in your stomach, because that's what this movie will do to you. Alright, now the spoiler warning's out of the way, and I gave my little recommendation to watch the movie. Hopefully you'll go see it if you haven't yet and come back and then finish this video if you really don't care or you get disturbed easy and are kind of here just to hear the whole sum of the movie. Alright, let's get right into spoiler territory. So Wallace does meet Howard for supper in this really creepy room. Wallace, still skeptical of the whole spider story, tells Howard how there was no spider was there, questioning him. Howard still tries to hold up his end of the story, but Wallace continues to question him, asking him things like, what did it look like? Howard gives a broad description of the spider and says that it was like the itsy bitsy spider. Wallace screams and demands that Howard lets him go, which Howard stands up out of his scooter, showing that Howard could walk the whole time. He then slaps Wallace across the face and tells him that he plans to surgically convert him into a walrus. We then see a scene of Allie. She was crying, laying on a bed, and talking about how Wallace is never there for her, and how she knows he cheats on her all the time. We then realize that Teddy and her are having an affair as he appears into the picture. She feels that he understands her more and that he's a nicer guy, which is true, and although that doesn't give her like a reason to have an affair and cheat on Wallace, you know, Wallace cheats on her all the time, and it's revealed that he really just doesn't care about her that much. He doesn't care about her opinion, he doesn't care about her feelings, all that mumbo jumbo. Then the scene switches back to Wallace, who wakes up to the sound of his phone. His girlfriend is calling him. He tries to wheel himself to the phone, however he arrives a little late. He then calls her right back, however she put her phone down right after he didn't answer. Teddy then sees the call but ignores it. Wallace leaves a message that he needs help, and then Howard comes from behind and knocks him out with a walrus bone. The next day, Allie sees his message and goes straight to authorities with Teddy. Eventually, they get led to a guy named Guy Lapointe, played by Johnny Depp, who had been trying to catch Howard for a long time. Simultaneously, we see Howard in a room with all these different blueprints that show human and walrus anatomy, and some weird diagrams showing half human, half walrus on them. We also see Wallace, unconscious, laying on the ground with both of his arm muscle tissues ripped out, sewed to his side. So basically his arms are sewed to his side and the tissue is basically all out of it. Ugh. Looks like he hasn't had the best day. He's clearly had some messed up stuff done to him, as his mouth looks really messed up, and just overall not the prettiest sight. We'll leave it at that. Then the scene shows Guy Lapointe in person, being extremely weird for a 5-minute one take. He is with Allie and Teddy. They are in some fast food place talking about how they are going to get Wallace back. Then we get to the reveal. Howard then appears to be at SeaWorld. Wait, I mean, not that. I mean the indoor version with basically only one attraction, a walrus area. Sounds fun. Can I buy tickets somewhere? We see Wallace chained to a pole, unable to talk in full walrus form. He screams for help, but since he can't talk, it really just makes walrus sounds, like torturous walrus sounds, which I don't think anybody wants to hear, but it actually is pretty disturbing. So from a guy that likes horror movies and likes disturbing things, this really actually did disturb me. And even though a lot of you will probably be like, it's a cake movie, I mean, it's not too bad, but that the scenes where he's screaming just chained to that pole really are disturbing, at least in my opinion. Here, I can play a few clips, just warning you guys, it's a little disturbing. Howard activates some mechanism which forces Wallace into the water, where he struggles to swim and starts to sink. At the very bottom of the water, he sees another dead human walrus, indicating that he wasn't Howard's first victim. He eventually gets the hang of it and starts to float. Due to this, Howard starts clapping in excitement. Then a disturbing yet kind of funny showdown occurs. Howard dresses up in a walrus suit and tells Wallace that he will kill him if he doesn't fight him. They fight, both as walruses, and Wallace ends up stabbing and killing Howard with his tusks. Arriving a little late, along with Allie and Teddy come running in. Points his gun at Wallace and is about to shoot him to get him out of his misery, but Allie yells at him not to. The last scene in the movie takes place 1 year after they rescue him. It shows Allie and Teddy visiting Wallace at the animal center. Wallace is in full walrus form and even is more of a walrus now. And unfortunately, it doesn't get really too much better from here, because in an emotional scene, Allie, out of all things she could have brought him, brings him a fish, either excited that he's a walrus or, I don't know, telling him to embrace it. I don't really know why she brought him a fish. I mean, maybe he's full walrus now and he just wants fish, Maybe he is okay and happy with his identification of a walrus, So basically, Allie feeds him a fish and in tears says, crying is the only thing that separates humans from animals. Wallace starts mourning, showing that he still has a little humanity left in him. And she basically psyched him. Here's a fish. Embrace your walrus. Psych, you're still crying. You're still human. The end. That is the walrus. Now, getting to my review part of the movie. Kevin Smith has always been a director that I admire. He just seems like someone I would want to hang out with, on a nice Saturday night. He just seems like a really chill dude. I like his sense of humor. And just overall, I really like him as a director. I love horror movies, so when I see one as different as this, it gets on my good side pretty easily. On a more serious note, the acting was really good in this movie. There's a lot of lines in that movie that I could see a lot of people being cringy at. In a movie like this, anytime there is bad acting, it kind of turns the movie from disturbing to comedic. The movie does have its flaws, though. Its inconsistency in tone is something I enjoyed, at times, but generally was the movie's greatest issue. Kevin Smith could have made a very effective horror movie while including some of the comedic aspects, but they just don't balance each other how they should. Having comedy in a horror movie isn't a bad thing, and there's even times where Kevin Smith does execute correctly, like the one I mentioned earlier where Howard is kind of telling Wallace why his leg's missing and Wallace isn't buying it and he keeps on making excuses. It's a really funny scene, and that is a good scene because it's actually intense because you're like, what happened to his leg? But at the same time, I laughed out loud because it's like funny because they're like, obviously this dude's lying. So that is a good example of how we did correctly do that. And I do understand why he put some of the comedy in there, just because, in a movie as disturbing as Tusk is, having enough of the comedy it made up for that. I'm not trying to say I didn't like the movie at all, because I really did like Tusk. I'm being really nitpicky. But overall, I really did think the movie was a good time, and I really did get disturbed, especially after my first viewing, dude. I was sitting there like, what? I'm going to give Tusk a 65%. And then I'll translate that for horror movies because horror movies are usually not really too good. So for 65% in a horror movie is like a B minus. So we'll give it that, like a B minus range. All right, guys, if you made it to the end of this video, I thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for sitting through this with me. I had a really fun time watching this. Don't feel bad for me like I was forced to. There might be other disturbing movies I do on this channel that you will feel bad for me, but this was not one of them. I like Kevin Smith, like I said earlier, a lot. So this was actually a good time, and I like getting disturbed for that small moment I did, while I was watching it. It's not like I couldn't sleep over it, but I'll put 2 movies up on the screen, and these are going to be 2 more disturbing movies. And if you want me to review either one of these movies, comment down below. Thank you guys for watching, and peace out.